Hello and welcome to another Monday night Q&A. I'm joined tonight by my colleague Jonathan Dare from the Technical Helpline. Good evening, Jonathan.
Good evening.
How's your Monday been so far?
Not too bad, actually. Eased back in after the long period of time off. Not too many calls and not too many emails, so quite pleasant.
Yeah, I hope a few people got the chance to have a bit of an extra time. So yeah, it's definitely been a long weekend, which has been nice. Just a few house rules. As with all of our live Q&A sessions, we'll start off with our question of the week, which we posted out across social media channels earlier today. We'll go through our answer to that question with the reasons why. Then while you're putting your questions in the chat, we'll go through some of the questions we didn't get around to from previous Q&A sessions, just to give you some time to get your questions posted. Please put your questions in the chat, remembering that there's no such thing as a stupid question. Please remember also to be respectful to each other in the chat, as the whole idea of the evening is that collectively we'll help each other with the aim of improving our collective knowledge of BS 7671 and the world of electrical installations. So without any further ado, we'll show you the this week's question. So this week's question was a simple question, but actually generated a lot of comment on debate on the social media channels. So the question itself was: if no previous documentation is available, is an investigation of the electrical installation required before carrying out an EICR? And we gave you the three options of yes, it would be required, no, it wouldn't, and a maybe. So what's our thoughts on this one, Jonathan? Is it required?
Well, yes, much to a lot of people's surprise, it is a requirement. And the regulation, the last sentence, states that where no previous documentation is available, investigation of the electrical installation shall be undertaken prior to carrying out the periodic inspection and testing. And it's a shall, so it is a requirement.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, and as I said, a lot of debate on the social media channels, the comments well, why and what does investigation mean, and no, it's not necessary, that's what your EICR is about. But as you say, Jonathan, it's in there, it's in black and white in that regulation with a shall be, which means it's a regulatory requirement. But it's one of those ones that you may think it's sort of good practice or common knowledge to do it if you don't know anything about the installation, but it's actually a bit more. In terms of compliance with 7671, it's a regulatory requirement. So yeah, one of those ones that I wasn't aware of until somebody's pointed it out, and then it's always stuck in my mind. What would be the reasons, Jonathan? What kind of things would we suggest that you might want to do that initial investigation for? What benefits would you get from it, or should you get from it?
One, it'll probably make your job easier going forward, but there's other things that need to be considered. For example, is the installation safe for the periodic inspection and testing? For example, if it's on a farm or something, you may have livestock and stuff, you may have to work around them. Maybe schools and that, may have to do it where there's areas are closed down on that, just for certain examples. You need to ascertain really with the client the scope of the work, whether it's the whole installation, whether some of it requires doing, and the reasons. For example, it may be for health and safety, electricity work requirements. It could be for licensing requirements, and various other insurance. So you need to really ascertain why it needs to be done, the scope and the depth, and then the sampling, what sort of percentage sampling you might want to do. So again, with a walk around and visual inspection and discussions, you can get a clearer view of how deep and what parts of the installation need to be inspected and tested, really.
Yeah. So you should get an awful lot of valuable information, which would then be useful for when you actually start the test and inspection process. But one of the engineers has already put into the chat, how would you document an investigation? So there's no actual official requirement to document your investigation, but you might want to make notes and comments which will then help you, for example, when you are documenting the scope, and you might want to pass information on to the responsible person so that they're ready for your process, i.e. give you the right access, enable you to isolate. So those kind of things might be information that you also pass across to the person that you're actually doing the test for. So yeah, interesting, and have a look for yourself at that regulation, because it is a shall be. So it's something that should be done. Okay, we'll have a look through, so please post your questions into the chat and we'll pick them up from there. One of the questions that was held over from the last session was, do I need to bond the metal handrails for a commercial swimming pool? The handrails are removable and sat in a PVC resin cup in the floor. The supply is TNCS and the pool's rebar is bonded. So a bit of an open question, Jonathan, but what's our thoughts on that one? Would I need to bond the handrails?
It all depends really whether they're deemed to be extraneous conductive parts or not. I mean, to be extraneous, they need to be obviously not part of the electrical installation. Obviously handrails they wouldn't be, and they need to not be in contact with the mass of the earth, so you introduce potential. So if they are extraneous, then they would need to be bonded. But by going by the description, if they're in insulated plastic pots, or so the description is, then they may well not be extraneous. They may be just isolated metalwork. Yeah.
I mean, the fact that they were sitting in PVC resin cups might indicate that they're actually isolated them from anything else electrical. But yeah, it's one of those situations where you need to confirm whether or not they are extraneous, either through visual inspection or even better through measurement, and then decide if they are extraneous. Then of course they would need to be bonded. Another question that was held over from last time was, is it acceptable to use the DNO cutout fuse to provide overcurrent protection for an SPD? So we do get this one quite often on the telephones and emails. Can we use if we're using an SPD which doesn't come with either an integral or an associated overcurrent protective device, can we use the cutout fuse to provide overcurrent protection for the SPD?
Short answer is no, because the regulations state that that in case the OCB overcurrent protective device operates because of an SPD failure, it could take out the whole installation, and there's a regulation that says you can't do that.
Yeah, absolutely spot on. So there's a reg 534.4.5.2 that states that in the case of overcurrent protective device operation arising from SPD failure, the continuity of the supply to the equipment should be unaffected. So therefore, if you used the cutout fuse, potentially you'd lose everything, which means that it's not appropriate to be used in that application. Another one that's been held over, when all I'm doing is changing a consumer unit, so no additions or alterations to the final circuits, so when all I'm doing is changing a consumer unit, what do I record on the scheduled inspection pages for cables concealed in walls being adequately protected against damage? Because again, this is a common question, and the person answering the question quite rightly says, well, I don't know how the cables have been installed, so how do I answer the scheduled inspection question, whether it's telling me is it compliant with 7671 or not. So what should you record in those sections on the scheduled inspections, Jonathan?
Well, if you haven't done any work and don't know what's going on with that, it's not within the extent of your work, then you should put NA, because the checklist applies only to the work that you've done. So it's important you put NA, and it's also very important that when you're putting the extent of your work on the installation certificate, what document thoroughly what you're actually doing and what you're not doing, basically, so that you're not responsible for parts of the installation that you haven't.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really important, isn't it, to get that box which says the extent of work covered by the certificate. Get the detail in there to make it clear what your certificate covers, and then also by exception, or sometimes you might actually want to state it also, you might want to exempt some things to make it clear that they aren't covered by your certificate. So you could make a comment in this instance about no additions or alterations to the final circuits, to make it clear that you haven't installed those cables, and therefore you're not responsible for the way that they were installed. Okay, we're starting to get some questions coming into the chat now, which is good, but we'll take one more previous one. In a domestic installation which includes solar PV, there's no warning label at the board regarding the alternative supply. The solar PV inverter is in the loft, and again at the isolator for the solar PV system there's no warning label of an alternative supply. So what classification code would we recommend on an EICR for the lack of those warning labels?
There would be a C2 code, and that is recommended in Best Practice Guide 4, page 14 to be exact. A C2 code where there's not a warning for an alternative means of supply, in this case PV, but it could equally apply to where there's other on-site generation. And there needs to be labels at various points. For example, the origin, at the meter position if it's remote from the origin, at the consumer unit or distribution board, depending on the type of installation, and at all points of isolation of supply that need to be isolated to maintain complete safe isolation when they're fed from more than one point.
Yeah, and it's I guess we're recommending that potentially dangerous classification code of a C2, because without that warning label, people may only isolate one point, i.e. might turn off the main switch of the consumer unit, and without warning that there's an alternative supply from the PV system, may feel that they've isolated. Now I know people will say that you should go through safe isolation procedure, which is absolutely correct, but at the same time it's a requirement, a regulatory requirement, to fit those warning labels, and so that's why we say potentially dangerous if they're not fitted, because it could lull people into a false sense of security that there's only need for one point of isolation. And of course it could be the fact that at the particular time they did their safe isolation procedure, the PV system may not be generating anything, and then it might kick in at a later time after they're doing whatever else they're doing. So yeah, a potentially dangerous, because it's another alternative source of supply that you may not have isolated. Okay, let's have a look through some of the questions that have come into the chat. People talking about the investigation from our first question. What type of investigation? You're looking at if it's perhaps a small domestic property and you're familiar with domestic properties and the size of the house, then perhaps an investigation's not really required, because you're familiar with that type and there's a limited sort of scope and functionality. It would tend to be the larger installations, the more perhaps ones that you may not be familiar with, like Jonathan mentioned, perhaps an agricultural, horticultural premises where you're into some of the special location requirements. So those would be the ones where you'd want to familiarise yourself with the actual installation to see. And somebody's mentioned further down as well that, you know, do you think the customer would want to pay for that survey as well as the EICR? So again, I think it's really aimed at those larger installations whereby if you don't do that survey, you might run into that initial investigation, you might run into problems when you actually start the test and inspection process, i.e. you can't get access to places that you wanted to, you can't isolate things that you wanted to, you haven't allowed enough time to do a complete inspection and test of the whole installation. So all of those things could be investigated and at least highlighted, if not resolved, during that initial investigation. So perhaps it should be part of your costing when you go back to the customer to talk about, well, you know, what do you want me to cover? Do you want me to do the whole installation? When was it last inspected? What's the reason for this inspection? Has there been issues, or are things breaking down? So all of those conversations we would suggest would be worthwhile having before you start, because otherwise it can end up with a very frustrated inspector if he's not able to do a full inspection and test of the installation, and also a very frustrated customer when you try and talk to them about lots of limitations which have only manifested themselves during the process but may have become apparent if you did that initial investigation. Okay, one of the first main questions, it's quite a long one, but we'll go with it. So SPD, regarding data and financial loss, would that need to be agreed with the client in regards to whether it's intolerable or not? As I assume we can't decide for them whether it or not it is, but we can only be able to explain to them the implications of it, so that they can make an informed decision whether it's intolerable or not. And if they still don't want one and believe it is tolerable and deemed to not be required, we just need to get them to agree that they understand the implications to not have one, and that they don't want one, and document it via a signed document or responded email of rejection to the SPD and attach it to the certificate. Is this correct? So yeah, I think that's spot on. It's a long question, but you're absolutely right. You can't decide for them what's tolerable. You can't decide for them what's considered a financial loss. So it is a conversation with the responsible person. Would you agree with that, Jonathan?
Definitely, yeah. And then you can't really, you can tell them what the issues electrically may happen and that, but it's what their processes are. I mean, if it's maybe a continual process, automation or something like that, where downtime have massive implications financially, or maybe data centers, or they'd probably be backed up more. But anything that's got going to have a huge financial or data implications, that'd be their call on that, really.
Yeah.
And if they're it's their choice. If they don't think it's if it is tolerable, then confirmation and some email or some other form to attach it to the certification.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the engineer that put the question in has has got it spot on, in that we can explain the implications, but we can't decide whether those implications would be tolerable, or whether that they would result in financial loss. So yeah, explain the implications and then let the responsible person decide. And then, as you say, if they say it's tolerable, and if they say they can withstand the financial loss, then document that and just ask them for a confirmation signature, so that there's no misunderstanding. It's clearly clarified, and there'll be no issues then as a sort of a comeback for the future. Okay, we've got one talking about, are all distribution circuits 5 seconds disconnection time, or 0.4 if it's under 32 amps? So it is all distribution circuits. So if you look at the regulation, any distribution circuit is considered 5 seconds, of course, unless it's TT, and then it's 1 second. And I think it's more to do with, we're talking about protection against electric shock, and the items of equipment associated with a distribution circuit are less likely for you to come into contact with, hence the extended disconnection time, and the reduced disconnection time for the final circuits, where the possible contact with people is increased. So I think that's the justification really for the two differences. Really boils down to sort of potential risk, which is less likely for human contact with a distribution circuit. Would you agree with that, Jonathan?
Yeah, that's spot on. That really, the fact that you're not allowed to hold any like handheld or in general contact with distribution boards and that, where you are with things plugged into final circuits and that. So you can have a longer disconnection time, and they equally apply to any distribution circuit, even like a 6 amp one feeding something. I don't know what you'd feed, but it may be some smaller circuits. There's no limit on the size, as it's any distribution circuit.
Yeah. Another question. How can you test if you don't know the basic limit? So yeah, I think that's one of the people commenting about the original question, and again, it's a good justification. If you don't know how circuits are distributed, for example, it's very difficult to do your EICR. Okay, we'll have a look at another question. I have to change the old fuse board with reliable fuses to a new one with dual RCD and new wiring for L room, I guess lounge room sockets and lights. The existing installation is old and the customer will renovate the house shortly. What type of certificate can I issue, and what will that certificate cover? So the work you're doing, if you're changing the consumer unit and you're adding new circuits, then that's got to be an installation certificate. So you would definitely need to provide an installation certificate. I'm reading between the lines, I might be wrong, but if the existing installation is old and the customer will renovate the house shortly, if you're into the realms of the private rented sector, and we're now talking about a landlord that requires confirmation that you're meeting the legislatively requirements of the private rented sector, you may need to do a full condition report. But for the work that you've described, i.e. a new consumer unit and new circuit, that would be an installation certificate. You wouldn't be able to survive with just a minor works. It would be a full EIC. Would you add anything to that, Jonathan?
No, that's exactly it. Again, extent to the work you're doing, you need to document so that people know, the certification covers just the consumer unit and these final circuits that you've added or altered, what have you done, and that it doesn't include all the existing circuits that are, you haven't touched on that. So you need to make it clear that where the boundary between what's been done and what's not been done.
Yeah, very much so, very much so. We'll have one that we might have to take a quick look in the book. So we're saying shower circuit, 6mm cable, twin and earth on a 40 amp breaker with an 18 meter run. Is it compliant? One thing I'm thinking of, we would need to just confirm the way that the cable's been installed, because that will have an effect on its current carrying capacity. The 18 meter run with 6mm cable, you shouldn't get any volt drop issues, but we'll take a quick look. But yeah, we would need to know to confirm that the installation method, so that we could check what the current carrying capacity is. But we'll have a look at that one in the background. Let's see what else we can pick up. I'm yet to look into the regulations that cover this future installation. However, can you provide guidance particular earthing to an apartment block with multiple incoming electrical supplies, separate supplies to each apartment, the communal areas and 2 commercial supplies? Many thanks. If you have got separate supplies to each apartment, then you're going to need to look at bonding requirements within each apartment, because obviously they'll be treated like individual installations, even though they may be in the same building. You would also need to consider, if you've got situations, for example, you mentioned communal areas and 2 commercial supplies. If there are situations where you could simultaneously access 2 different earthing arrangements, so for example, a supply with its earth to one of the properties might have an external light or an external socket or some external extraneous conductive part which is bonded. You'd then need to check, if it is simultaneously accessible, that the earth, there's no harmful potential or dangerous potential between those 2. So you might need to consider, if they are different supplies, for example coming off a different LV transformer, you may need to bond the main earth terminals together to ensure that you're maintaining that equipotential zone. But if each apartment has got its own incoming electrical supply, then you need to treat each apartment as its own installation and bond within the apartments. But yeah, just look for those situations, most likely in the communal areas, where you might have simultaneous access to 2 different earthing arrangements. Can you think of any other issues there to think about, Jonathan?
I was just going to add to that, if you could join 2 main earthing terminals together, it needs to use a bonding conductor size for the largest requirement. So I mean, if you had, say, a large commercial supply that was larger than domestic, would have to be sized for the larger installation, basically. I mean, flats do, and multiple buildings do present issues where you've got different services, and whether they're where the incoming metallic services are, or if they're metallic at all. So it's not a straightforward answer for blocks of flats or multi-use premises.
Okay. Yeah. No, it's one of those situations where you need to look at each individual. Will probably be quite straightforward, because it's got its own supply. You treat it as a single installation and create your equipotential zone if you're using ADS. But it's where there's an overlap. So if I can touch the earthing arrangement of one installation and simultaneously the earthing arrangement of another, I need to ensure that there is no harmful potential between the 2. If we look at our question on 6mm twin and earth, so 6mm twin and earth, if we say it's clipped direct, will carry 47 amps. So on a 40 amp breaker, that would be fine in terms of current carrying capacity. An 18mm run, no issues there with volt drop, 7.3 millivolts. So in the brown book, I'm looking at page 456 to get my current carrying capacities and volt drop. So yeah, that would appear, with the information provided, appear to be okay. But one key factor would be, how's it been installed? Because, for example, if we drop down to method 100, 101, 102 or 103, then our current carrying capacity drops dramatically, because we've now got issues of thermal insulation covering the cable. So for example, even if it were method 100, our current carrying capacity drops to 34 amp, So 40 amp wouldn't provide overcurrent protection. But then we'd also now need to look at, well, how powerful is the shower? What's its design current? So long as the design current was less than the current carrying capacity of the cable, that too would be acceptable with regards current carrying capacity. But yeah, one of those simple questions on the surface, but we need a little bit more detail to give you confirmation. So yeah, think about installation method, how's it's been installed, because that has an effect on the current carrying capacity of the cable, and also confirm the power rating of the shower, so that we can determine what the load current would be under normal operation. Okay, we'll take one more from the chat if we can. So would a 40 amp cooker or shower circuit be recorded as 0.4 second disconnection time or 5 second? Well, they would be considered a final circuit. So yeah, they would be, if we're talking about a TN system, they would be on a 0.4 second disconnection time. Would you agree with that, Jonathan, for a cooker or shower?
So it's a 40 amp. If it's a 40 amp final, 40 amp was 0.4, isn't it?
Yes. That's what he's asking.
0.4. Sorry, 5. Isn't it 5? If it's over 32 amps.
Is it over?
Is it 4? It depends on the
size
of the breaker.
No, you're right. Yeah, I'm getting them round the wrong way, aren't I? That we're over there. Yeah,
if it's over 32,
yes,
it should be 5 seconds
yes,
or 1 second.
But they are the ones. What triggered in my mind is those are the ones that should stand out on your typical domestic installation certificate as being different from the lower rated final circuits. So no, thanks for that, Jonathan. That was good. I don't
know if anyone's got a 40 or a 32.
Good catch. No, it was a good catch. Okay, we're massively running out of time again. This is always the quickest 40 minutes of our week. So we'll just finish off with another regular one that we get asked. Is there a regulation which tells us how high a socket outlet should be installed above the floor or above kitchen worktops? So is there a regulation which tells us how high on those things, Jonathan?
Not specifically, no. There's a regulation that says that you need to make sure that the sockets are suitably high enough so there's no issue with damage to the cables or prevent the insertion removal of plug tops and the flex in that, really. So there's not actually a specific amount, it's just regulation states that it needs to be suitably high so it doesn't cause issues in that. I mean, the guidance is 100 mil clearance from the bottom of the socket outlet to either a worktop or floor or where it's mounted. Yeah,
and that's we give, if people have seen our pocket guide series, and that's the recommendation that we give in that, at least 100 mil, not 100 meters. That would be a distance. 100 mil, because then it's all about ensuring that there's no stress on the cable or the connections within the plug or the connection between the plug and the socket outlet itself. So yeah, that's what it's all about, ensuring that you're not putting undue stress on that cable or its connections. Okay, let me just tell you about some other webinars that we've got coming up. So next week there's a webinar on certification and reporting, and looking at some of the changes that have been introduced in Amendment 2. A fortnight after that, on the 29th of June, we've got an electric vehicle charging webinar, again looking at some of the impact of Amendment 2 and also some changes that are coming in the future with regards additional parts of the building regs. On the 13th of July, we've got a webinar covering electrical safety checks for the UK rental sector. That's a common theme at the moment, and there's a lot of chatter on social media about that. So all of those webinars are available for you to register at the moment. So if you go onto the NIC-EIC website, you can register your attendance on those. They're all on a Wednesday night at 8 o'clock. So please do have a look at the information that's available and sign up for those. With regards Q&As, there'll be another Q&A in a fortnight from today, so that'll be Monday the 20th of June at 8 p.m. Thank you very much for those of you that have posted your questions and your answers, especially the ones correcting me that it is anything over 32 amps is 5 seconds. That's good, but that's great. It's great to see the questions. Thanks very much for your questions tonight. Apologies if we didn't get round to answer your question, but we will. Those are the ones that we'll hold over and start the next session in a fortnight's time. So yeah, thanks once again. Any last words, Jonathan?
Really, it's just been very, very interesting. It's my first one, and yeah, it's been very, very good. And
first one, but not last one.
No,
that's good. That's good. Yeah, no, it's, you know, we're trying to get you to see the faces. You know, I'm sure many of you will have spoken to myself and Jonathan on the phone, but it's nice to be able to stick a face to the name now. And yeah, Jonathan's one of the helpline team, so at different times we'll answer the phone, involved in emails, is involved in validating assessment reports, looking at help for technical for our marketing group and publications, and also the customer relations side. So it's good. So without any further ado, thank you very much, and we look forward to perhaps seeing you again in a fortnight. And also, please do, if you're interested in those webinars. And of course, all of that and tonight can be used as your as CPD. So if you are one of our registered contractors, please don't forget to record it as part of your CPD. Okay, thanks very much. And as those two famous Ronnies used to say, good night from me.
Good night from him.
Good night from him. Cheers. Thank you very much, people, and we'll see you again soon.